Many of you know who Jordan Peterson is, naturally. He's got a website, understandmyself.com, where you can take a personality quiz that'll rank you on the big 5 characteristics. It's good. I recommend that you do it. It's not very expensive. It's kind of interesting. And if you're in a relationship, or if there's somebody that is a good friend or someone you spend a lot of time with, and you both take the test, then it's interesting to compare on the basis of the big 5 personality traits what you already know about your differences. Well, one of the characteristics in the big 5 is neuroticism. And when I took the Peterson test, I thought it was pretty fascinating in its definition of neuroticism, which I'd never heard expressed that way before. It's this, that before something happens, you expect the worst possible outcome. And after it happens, you give it the worst possible interpretation. So I wanted to give you some advice if you're a neurotic. The first thing is, don't read the news. I actually heard this from one of Peterson's videos because being neurotic myself, I was looking for some advice on what to do and what not to do in order to manage the tendency to see things in their worst light. Well, you read the news and, for example, you may want to plug your ears if you're a neurotic, although I'm sure you've heard much worse already this morning. Just a few days ago, there was some death on stage at a Moscow theater. So you're scrolling through the morning news and you see somebody died in this freak accident over there. Well, now let me ask you, and by the way, you don't even have to read the article. As soon as you see accidental death, if you have neurotic tendencies, and maybe even if you don't, but certainly if you do, it's going to throw your day off a little bit. You're going to feel it. You're going to carry it with you. You're going to imagine it, all the things that could have happened. You'll walk through the day in the life of the person who was killed. All kinds of horrible things. And by the way, it's horrible that they died, as far as we know. God bless their souls. I don't know the story I'm explaining to you. We didn't even click through the article. But what's the point? If you are a neurotic, is it so essential that you see that and all of the other instances of violence and catastrophe that you have no control over? You can't do anything about it. It's not going to have any positive impact on your life or on your day. It's not giving you insight into the world that you previously lacked. All that it's doing is feeding you something that you know is going to make you anxious, that you know is going to make you depressed, or that you know is going to make you even more neurotic. So I think a first piece of advice is just don't do that. Don't expose yourself needlessly to the things that are going to make it worse that you have no control over. Something else that I found was helpful, you may find helpful also, is this. And it kind of has to do with taking the test with somebody else or having someone in your life who also does it and is not as neurotic as you are. Well, suddenly you just begin to see it's your tendency to interpret things in the worst possible light before they happen. It's your tendency to think of them in the worst way after they happen. But that's just you. Somebody else who's less neurotic gives it the best possible interpretation and expects the best. Somebody else is somewhere in the middle. Today they do it this way, tomorrow they do it that way. And what that allows for, I think, is some freedom to try to work on developing the strength or developing the ability to see things more positively. Because you no longer are identifying your outlook with the way the world is. You now see your outlook as one way of seeing the world. And here's another example. There's another trait, agreeableness. I'll give you what I think is the perfect expression of it. I'm a tall guy. My wife is not so tall. And sometimes we go to the movie theater, or we used to before everything was shut down. There might be a seat that's a great seat for us, but because I'm so tall, I'm very conscious of blocking the view of the people who are sitting behind me. I can't stand it. I couldn't watch a movie, even if it was the best movie I'd ever seen in my life, in the knowledge that I'm inconveniencing somebody else. I just can't do it. So usually I sit in the back. There's nobody behind me. I'm not bothering anybody. And of course, stretch my legs out if need be. Well, my wife, bless her soul, is less concerned about the idea of inconveniencing somebody else, not because she's mean or rude or anything like that, but just because on this particular trait of, I guess it is agreeableness, my tendency is to pay a lot of attention to whether I'm conveniencing others and to inconvenience myself instead. Her tendency is to let other people figure out for themselves whether they're inconvenienced and if they are to do something about it. So that's just a different way of being in the world, or a different way of looking at the world. And there's a spectrum, just like there is with all of the other traits. What it means is this, that I sometimes look and see how she's living her life. And she does many, many things that I don't do and wish I could do. And you're going to see in your life a bunch of people who are taking a step further than you would, because you would have stopped yourself and said, I don't want to inconvenience anybody. And they take a step further. And the result is not, like you might think, that they're going around inconveniencing everybody. Like, it's not that you're right and that what they're doing is the very thing you're trying to avoid, going around inconveniencing a bunch of people. No. They may be getting the job that you wanted, getting the raise that you wanted, getting the man or the woman or the relationship that you wanted. They may be achieving things that you wish you could have achieved because they didn't stop themselves where you do stop yourself, out of this fear of inconveniencing people, like I said, or out of some sense of agreeableness. On the other hand, you may be more adept at getting along with people. You may have a reputation of being much nicer, much friendlier, much easier to get along with, less of a abrasive character or figure, and that may work in your favor in some cases. So the opportunity is to say, where is my being overly neurotic or being overly agreeable or whatever the case is helping me, and where is it hurting me? In the areas where it's hurting you, it's helpful to be able to see what the other options are, what you can do. So it's no longer a straitjacket. It's no longer just a constraint. You have a little bit of freedom around it. You can stop and say, oh, this is just my agreeableness keeping me from taking an action that might help me. Why don't I march on and do it anyways? So Jordan Peterson, understandmyself.com, the personality quiz, Big Five. Have a look. I recommend taking it. Take it with your lover. Take it with your partner and compare notes. I think you'll find it to be an interesting experiment. Next, is Plato a proto-Communist? I have a lot of people following me who know that I post about politics and philosophy. A lot of them are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, American patriot style people. Bless their souls. I love those people. And a lot of them are political philosophy followers who read the old books. I love those people too. And what you find is a bit of a mismatch at times, because on the basis of the old political philosophy, you can criticize woke liberalism, all of the insanities that we don't even need to go through because you're familiar enough with them as it is. You can criticize it intelligently on the basis of Plato, Aristotle, and the whole classical tradition of political philosophy. But it's also the case that for many of these classical liberal type people, Plato represents a kind of proto-fascism, proto-statism, proto-totalitarianism, and, like I've been hearing most recently, proto-communism. Now, the source for that claim, I guess, is in the Republic, where Socrates is discussing, from the point of view of the common opinion, the ideal state. And in the ideal state, there's no private property among the rulers. They have their women and children in common, so you don't have your own family. You have all of the children treating all of their elders as mothers and fathers, and all of the age group that they're in as brothers and sisters. So there's no private family. There's no nuclear family. There's no, this is my wife and my child. There's a community of wives and children for the men. Okay, no private family, very important. No private property, no private family. And you might say that's like a kind of proto-communism. Nobody has anything of their own and everything is in common. And therefore, Plato's a proto-communist, incompatible with classical liberalism. No property rights, no life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What's going on here? We shouldn't be over-reliant, therefore, on Plato and criticizing woke liberalism, because after all, if he's proto-communist, we're opening up the door to not only, by the way, getting rid of private property and all of that, but also technocratic rule of experts. So you have this class of know-it-all scientists who are running our lives independently of our rightful claim to political and civil liberties. And you may say, that's in Plato too, because he had the rule of the philosopher kings, and the liberal managerial class is like the philosopher kings today. And don't you see, it's all a kind of version of Platonism, weirdly enough, this modern woke insanity. All right, you can kind of understand the idea there, but it's just not the best way to understand Plato himself. So just because Socrates argues somewhere in the Republic for the idea of the community of wives and children, or that the guardians should have no private property, does not mean that he's saying as a blueprint, that's what we should do. You, Americans in 2021, or we Athenians back in our time, must institute this communist paradise. That's not the purpose of the teaching. Rather, let me give you a quick example of how you could start to make sense of what the proposals are there. First of all, you have to understand why they're talking about that topic at that point in the book. How does this arise at all? Why should the question of private property and the private family come up in the kind of discussion that they're having? So you have to see it in light of the whole conversation. The Republic is a dialogue. There are characters in it who are talking to each other. And just like if you popped into a conversation in the middle of one that's going on, you might hear something that doesn't make sense unless the people walk you through how they got to where they are, what they had been talking about in the first place. It can be shocking otherwise. So that's the first thing. You need a little bit of the context. But another thing is this. You'd be surprised maybe to learn how much of Plato's philosophy is political philosophy, or is primarily concerned with the relationship between philosophy on one hand, politics on the other. Philosophy and politics. Knowledge and opinion, or the quest for knowledge and opinion. This is almost the dominating theme of all of Plato's writings, which, if you haven't studied him, may be surprising just how central the political questions are for him, or the question about the relationship between philosophy and politics. So now we ask, what would it look like for a political community to be remade in the image of philosophical knowledge, let's say? So in politics, you have a lot of opinions about what's just and unjust, what's right and wrong, what's progressive and what's regressive. That's why you have this daily hustle and bustle of political parties and political commentators, because there's such deep disagreement. But now let's go to another level, or another area or subject matter. What about, for example, in math, arithmetic, geometry, algebra? The debates are not as obviously fierce in the sense that there's not a disagreement over the basics. So Plato has this view, or Socrates has this view, or we can say the classics have this view, that if it's knowledge, then it is fixed, firm, universal, shared, and all of that. And now you ask the question, and by the way, here's another thing. Is knowledge private property? If I know something, does that knowledge belong to me? Well, it would seem like it belongs universally to anybody who knows it. So you take the level of philosophical knowledge or understanding where the truth is in common and nothing is private, and you say, what would it look like if we had that characteristic mirrored in the realm of the political? If we had enlightened politics that are so enlightened that we've removed prejudice and opinion and instead instituted scientific knowledge, we would have a kind of universalism there, a lack of privacy there, an openness. So I'm not telling you this is the only way to understand the communistic theses in the Republic, but it's super different from seeing it as a recommendation to go and institute communism politically. It's something that gets you thinking about the relationship between knowledge on one hand, which seems to be universal and not private, and the requirements of politics and particularly of justice. Here's another quick example. When you have your family or your property, it's yours. You claim it. You say that it's yours. It belongs to you. It's private. It's yours. It's your property. Well, justice, which is one of the big themes of the Republic, may have something to do, at first glance, with the common good, with what's good for everybody. Not just with your self-interest, but with the common interest, with the common good. And now we ask a very basic question. Is there a tension between one's private good and the common good? important question, somehow at some point an obvious question. And how would we illustrate the view that concern with the common good requires minimizing one's own interest with one's private or personal good? Well, by modeling this class of guardians in the Republic who have no private good, no home of their own to care for, nor no wife of their own to care for, no investments of their own to care for. They're totally concerned with the common good. And so we see in the dialogue before our own eyes represented this minimizing of the private interest for the sake of the service of the common good. Now, does that mean that Plato is saying if you want your politics to be just, you have to have instituted communism? Not at all. Because what he may be saying is this: the demands that the desire for pure justice place on the political community are so extreme that if we think them through, there'll be a reduction to absurdity. We'll see that they're impossible and maybe even undesirable. If justice is primarily concerned with the common good, and if total concern for the common good requires the elimination of all privacy, then it may be that we can never expect total justice in our political communities. In other words, Plato may be showing us, like one of the commentators says, the absurdity of every ideological program that tries to institute justice full and true in politics. It teaches us something about the limitations of politics. So the reason I wanted to tell you all of this, first of all, to direct you to the study of the Republic together with competent guides and commentators, but also just because I've been hearing in my circles, in my social media and elsewhere, this worry that Plato's a proto-communist. And you have to learn how to read the Republic rightly in order not to mistake the way that Plato teaches us something about the essence of political life with practical proposals that you might think he wants you just to go out and implement. Okay, so enough about that. I guess I can mention just in passing. Let's see whether this works. Yeah, millermanschool.com. This is my online, school, New Perspectives on Philosophy and Politics Beyond Academia Without Sacrificing Quality of Instruction. And I do have a course there on the Republic. You can take it if you want. The first lecture is free in this free trial, as are many other lectures like the one from the Strauss course, the one from the Heidegger course. But never mind that, because whether or not you study it with me, you should just be aware of this, what I said about the Republic. So we have neuroticism, Jordan Peterson, the whole thing about agreeableness and finding out what you're like so that you can correct as need be. We have Plato. And now, just before we part ways, let's discuss one more thing, shall we? Yesterday was Thanksgiving. Why is the camera doing that? Yesterday was Thanksgiving. My kids were home. I love my kids, but if you've ever spent a lot of time around kids when they're loud and screaming and crying, it can be pretty infuriating. So what I would normally do in a situation like that is go to work in a cafe. Well, as you no doubt know, there are limitations these days as to who can go to work in a cafe. Sorry about that. Not sure why the camera's doing that. Sort it out in a minute. But here's the thing. It would be nice to go to a cafe, but they don't let just anybody in these days. So whether or not you do the thing that you need to do to be admitted into the places where you'd like to go is your own business, for sure. And you may have excellent reasons to do it, and you may have excellent reasons not to do it. You need to decide for yourselves, obviously, what the right decision is, but independently of any advice or anything like that, far be it from me, it's the last thing on my mind to advise you on this issue. It is the case that the arm twisting is getting to be a little bit much, and some of the contradictions are getting to be a little bit much. As you all know, if you compare, let's say somebody walks into a restaurant or a cafe, and you already know the scenarios. Imagine this person has tested negative recently for something, and has all the antibodies for something and is absolutely no risk or threat to anybody, is in great shape, just ideal case scenario. And on the other hand, there may be people inside who have, let's just say, a totally different profile. They've done all the right things externally, and yet they're still sick and they're not taking care of themselves and all of that. And you're ordering with a mask on and they're sitting with one off, and they can be in and you can't be. So these contradictions, together with the coercion, together with the delegitimization of anybody who has any questions, whether those persons are expert scientists or not, whether they're just free citizens who have the right to want to make the right decision and not have it be rushed or coerced. It's I don't know what it's like for you guys, but March 2020, it seemed like this may be something that passes relatively quickly. October 2021, you may be feeling the squeeze. People are getting fired from their jobs. People are losing their livelihoods. And I just want to say, it's a difficult time for many people, a difficult situation for many people. And it seems to have gone too far in terms of the arm twisting and in terms of the lack of coherence with respect to some of these policies. But you have to ask yourselves, maybe you know better what you would have done under the circumstances, what policies you would have instituted, what decisions you would have made. You put yourself in the seat of the policymakers. But still, it's too much. It's too much. I would have loved to go to a cafe to get away from my kids. That's just me. Some people are losing their jobs. Some people are losing on the other side of the equation, some people are losing their family members who weren't, prepared for what befell them, medically speaking. So, I don't know. I'd love to know what you think. Those of you who are holdouts, feel free to make your case in the comments for why you're holding out, what you're concerned about. Those of you who maybe did the thing and have some regrets, perhaps you can say where you're coming from. And those of you who did the thing and have no regrets and wish that everybody would do it, that's the situation. It's not that anybody wants people to get sick. It's not that anybody wants to turn a blind eye to medical, biological, and scientific realities. But we're dealing here with many political questions, many policy issues, and there is such a thing as civil and political liberties. There is such a thing as individual conscience and judgment. And you just have to begin to worry and begin to wonder when that's being so badly mistreated. Anyway, nice to see you. Have a great day. Until the next video, goodbye.